Hello, everyone. This is the 111th episode of the Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles and the Soccer Nostalgia blog, and I'm joined by Paul from Shipland, England, and the 1888 Letter blog. We are pleased to have Irish freelance writer, historian, and broadcaster Mr. John O'Carroll once again on our podcast. For this episode, we continue our interview series with Mr. O'Carroll as we discuss the matches of the Republic of Ireland national team, this time during the 1989-90 season. Welcome back, John.
Mm. Thank you, Shahan, and hello to you and Paul, and always a pleasure to be on your podcast.
Yeah, thank you for joining us, John. Can you start us off by looking back to the start of this season, 1989, and the state of the Republic of Ireland national team on the verge of World Cup qualification?
Well, as you rightly pointed out, Paul, optimism and expectation was quite high, and there was a real feel-good factor about soccer at international level in Ireland, because, as you say, the Republic were on the verge of qualifying for the 1990 World Cup. They were almost there, and it was expected at this stage that they were going to qualify. The excitement of playing in a World Cup finals for the first time, was certainly something that was creating a lot of excitement and a lot of optimism and a lot of hope. And the feeling was that if we could maintain the form that we had shown to date in the World Cup qualification campaign, not only would we qualify, but with a favourable draw, we may actually do quite well in the World Cup tournament the following summer.
There were only two matches left in the qualifiers against Northern Ireland at home and Malta away. I imagine there was not much suspense left.
Not particularly, no, because we have to remember as well that, okay, Spain were the favourites to qualify, and rightly so, but Hungary had been somewhat in regression for a couple of seasons prior to this, and Northern Ireland were, I suppose, their glory era was over at this stage, so they were in the process of rebuilding again. So, yeah, I mean, there wasn't too many obstacles foreseen in the Republic's way at this stage as regards qualifying for the 1990 World Cup.
We start off the season with a friendly match at Dublin at Lansdowne Road against West Germany on September 6, 1989. For this match, we have the following lineup. Packy Bonner of Celtic Glasgow in goal, Chris Morris of Celtic Glasgow, Steve Staunton of Liverpool, captain of the team Mick McCarthy. He had joined French side Olympique Lyonnais that season. David O'Leary of Arsenal, Liam Brady of West Ham United. He'd be replaced by Andy Townsend of Norwich City in the 35th minute. Paul McGrath of Aston Villa. John Aldridge of Liverpool. He would soon join Spanish side Real Sociedad. He'd be replaced by Tony Cascarino of Millwall in the 74th minute. Frank Stapleton of Blackburn Rovers. He'd be replaced by John Byrne of French side Le Havre in the 74th minute. Ronnie Whelan of Liverpool. And Tony Galvin of Swindon. Now, this was Tony Galvin's 29th and final cap. His first cap had been in 1982. Now, the West German side, they were missing Lothar Matthäus and Andy Brehme, the Italian bass players. In fact, they're missing the other Italian bass players as well, Rudi Feller and Thomas Berthold. But nevertheless, they were a strong side with the likes of Pierre Litbarski, Andy Miller, Thomas Hessler, managed by Franz Beckenbauer. This match ended as a 1-1 tie. Frank Stapleton scored in the 10th minute, taking advantage of Thomas Hessler's erroneous back pass. West Germany tied the match in the 33rd minute through Hans Dorfner, who scored with a long-range shot from outside of the box.
Well, this, as you rightly pointed out, Shahan, first of all, it was a glamour friendly and it was seen as ideal, I suppose, preparation or tuning up for the upcoming World Cup. In that West Germany were a quality team. As we know, they were building towards the 1990 World Cup, which they would ultimately win. They were going fairly well in their own qualification campaign at this stage. And even though, as you say, they were without the Italian based players, they were still quite a strong team. Now, as regards to the Republic lineup, this kind of generated, or in the aftermath of the game, this lineup was to generate a little bit of controversy in that, for some reason, Jack decided to start three 33-year-olds, namely Frank Stapleton, Tony Galvin, and Liam Brady. Now, Tony Galvin, as it turned out, and as you pointed out, it was his last cap. He played the full 90 minutes, but Liam Brady, of course, was substituted in the 35th minute, almost immediately after the German equaliser. And Frank Stapleton, too, was substituted before the game concluded. So there was a feeling there, that even though Jack Charlton denied it subsequently, there was a feeling among some of the Irish soccer public that did Jack maybe set out intentionally or otherwise to maybe try and humiliate some of these older players, in that by starting them all together and putting them up against a quality team, that they weren't going to last the pace, or they weren't really going to be effective for a full 90 minutes against quality opposition. Now, I mean, Liam Brady, he was taken off after 35 minutes or so. And as it turned out, this was Liam's penultimate appearance for the Republic. In actual fact, he wasn't to play again until his final appearance the following May against Finland, in a game which was actually his testimonial. Frank Stapleton, too, he was substituted. And from now on, he was to play quite a limited role in the Republic team. He did go to the World Cup in 1990, but he did not see a single moment of action. And of course, it was Tony Galvin's last game as well. So even though it was a friendly, you would have to question as to why there were so many, shall we say, of the older guard starting the game and all at once as well. Now, of course, Liam Brady, as you pointed out, he was replaced by Andy Townsend. So that would indicate maybe that, as well as maybe Liam Brady being past it a little bit, maybe Jack preferred maybe the work rate of Andy Townsend more so than the creativity of Liam Brady. But be that as it may, anyway, it did generate some controversy among the knowledgeable soccer public, but Jack denied afterwards that his intention was to make an example or show these elder statesmen in a bad light. Because, as he said, as regards the substituting Liam Brady, when Jack was asked about why Liam was substituted, Jack's reply was that he didn't do it to embarrass Liam, and if he actually wanted to embarrass Liam, he would have left Liam on for the entire 90 minutes. To this day, it's hard to know really what the reason was behind this particular selection of these players. And I mean, the fact that, he was to play them all together at the same time in the same game against quality opposition. But anyway, going back to the game itself, it was a good result against a team that, as we know, were to gain ultimate honours the following year. And it was seen as, needless to say, ideal preparation and an ideal tune-up for the World Cup qualifier to come against Northern Ireland.
Just going back to Liam Brady, him and Jack Charlton did seem to have a little bit of a difficult relationship, and you could see how this might have been interpreted as undermining Liam Brady. Do you personally think there might have been any element of that?
There possibly could have been, yeah, because as you know, Paul, Jack, for some reason, tended to gravitate against skillful attacking players. Jack seemed to prioritise work rate, commitment, as we say in Ireland, doing the dirty work, chasing lost causes and, applying yourself and being workmanlike in your approach and so on. So Jack seemed to prioritise that over skill. You could say as well, of course, by this stage that Liam was 33 and maybe his best years were behind him, I think it's fair to say. And even in matches that he had played, certainly since Euro 88, he wasn't lasting the full 90 minutes in any of them, it's fair to say. And actually, in some of the World Cup qualifiers until now, he had been used as what we call today an impact substitute. But yeah, I mean, there was a rift there between Liam and Jack, which was well documented. But Liam actually recently, in a television documentary which aired there last year, Liam actually said that in the aftermath of his retirement, which was the following year against Finland, he actually received a letter from Jack Charlton thanking Liam for his commitment and his service to Ireland over the years. So that would indicate that maybe Jack didn't purposely set out to undermine Liam, but at the time anyway, there was a perception there that Jack didn't value Liam's contribution to the team as much as he should have. You could say likewise about Frank Stapleton. Okay, Tony Galvin played the full 90 minutes, but Tony Galvin was never to play for Ireland again.
Whatever Jackie Charlton's intentions, Liam Brady got the message, and he announced his international retirement shortly afterwards.
He was one of Ireland's greatest ever players, there's no doubt about that. And he was certainly one of the first Irishmen, certainly, to go abroad and play in a top continental league.
In fact, it would be fair to say that he was the best Irish player of his generation, in a way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely, of course. And I would say as well, kind of one of the best players ever to emerge from the English league. When I say one of the best players, I mean one of the best players as in, ultimately going abroad to this area and making a successful career for himself there.
As we've mentioned, this was Tony Galvin's last cap. What are your thoughts on his international career?
He was a good servant to the cause, never let the side down, was quite skillful at times. Like Liam, had a successful club career, except though obviously Tony didn't go abroad, but he had a long career with Tottenham Hotspur and subsequently went to Sheffield Wednesday. He never let the Republic of Ireland team down, but again, maybe years were catching up with him at this stage, and maybe Italian 90 just came when he had gone past the peak of his career. Because I suppose maybe the Tony Galvin of 10 years previous, it would have been interesting to see, what impact he would have made, say, on the World Cup tournament.
Now we come to the first World Cup qualifier of the season. On October 11th, 1989, against Northern Ireland at Dublin. Now, for this match, we have Bonner in goal, Chris Morris, Mick McCarthy, captain of the side, Steve Staunton, he'd be replaced by David O'Leary in the 77th minute, Ronnie Whelan, Andy Townsend, Kevin Marn of Sporting Gijón in Spain, Ray Houghton of Liverpool, John Aldridge. At this point, he had joined Spanish side Real Sociedad, Tony Cascarino, and Kevin Sheedy of Everton. The Republic of Ireland won this match in a convincing fashion, 3-0. Ronnie Whelan scored the first goal in the 43rd minute, when after George Dunlop had punched out a cross, he knocked in a loose ball. In the 47th minute, Kevin Sheedy crossed from the right side and Tony Cascarino headed in. 10 minutes later, in the 57th minute, on the left side, Sheedy passed to Houghton in the middle, and he shot from the edge of the box for the third goal. As I said, this was a comprehensive win over the Irish neighbors, and it was a reflection of the progress of the Republic compared to the descent of the Northern Ireland side.
Yeah, absolutely, Shahan. Well, that's a good synopsis you make of the game. I remember this game actually quite well because it was a Wednesday lunchtime kickoff here in Ireland. I remember actually there was great excitement throughout the entire country. In actual fact, I was in school at the time and classes were suspended that afternoon for a couple of hours. So we all went into the school hall to watch the game on TV. So that was a novelty in itself, I have to say. So it was a convincing win for the Republic, not without some hairy moments, shall we say, early on in the game. But once Ronnie Whelan scored the first goal, there was really only going to be one outcome after that. And the Republic gradually took control. And then, as you say, in the second half, they added 2 further goals. But this really was, I suppose, it was a clash between two teams that were really kind of going in different directions as regards form, in that the Republic were on the ascent, whereas Northern Ireland, they were in regression at this stage, it's fair to say. And even though they were capable of getting some good results from time to time, they weren't able to maintain consistency over an entire qualification campaign, which they had been able to do in the glory years of the 1980s. Again, maybe due to, I suppose maybe a lack of talent coming through and the backbone of the team that served them so well in the 1980s, the backbone of that team gradually retiring or breaking up or whatever. but a convincing win for the Republic, and that more or less guaranteed qualification for the 1990 World Cup, because what all that meant was that our closest challengers in the group, Hungary, still had to play Spain twice, home and away, and Hungary were playing Spain later that evening in Budapest. And barring a Hungary win, what this Ireland win over Northern Ireland meant was that Ireland would only need a point in the final game in Malta to qualify for the World Cup. Now, as it turned out, Shahan, that Spain-Hungary game in Budapest did finish in a 2-2 draw. Spain did have a bit of work to do themselves to qualify, so they weren't guaranteed qualification yet. So, all told anyway, it was a satisfactory day's work for the Republic. And as I said, they were actually, after so many years of failure and the occasional near miss, they were finally on the cusp of making it onto the greatest stage of all in international soccer.
Yes, and this was achieved on November 15th, 1989 at Valletta at Malta. For this match, we have Bonner, McGrath, O'Leary, Moran. He replaced by Chris Morris in the 33rd minute. Staunton, Houghton, captain of the team Ronnie Whelan, Townsend, Sheedy, Aldridge, and Cascarino. Ireland took the lead in the 30th minute through John Aldridge's header. In the 68th minute, Andy Townsend was fouled in the box, and John Aldridge scored from the penalty kick. We still have to remind everyone that John Aldridge, even though he had broken his duck the previous season against Tunisia, he was still struggling to score at the international level. So it was a rarity to score 2 goals in a match for him.
Yeah. I think actually, Shahan, were these his first competitive goals?
Yes.
Yeah, I think
Tunisia
maybe,
was a friendly, yeah. You could say he repaid Jackie Charlton's faith in him in this match.
Yes.
Ireland were through to the World Cup for the first time.
Yeah, there was great delight in the country, and that we had finally got onto the greatest stage of all in international soccer. The game itself, there wasn't really too much to report on it because it was more or less a dominant Irish display from start to finish. Of course, they did only need a draw to begin with, but Jack couldn't take any chances nonetheless. So he went with a strong 11. Of course, simultaneously, you had Spain playing Hungary in Seville, and Spain won that game quite well to top the group. So what that meant was that we qualified in second place, comfortably ahead of Hungary by now. This group of players that had qualified for Euro 88, they had finally cemented their standing as being a formidable team in Europe at this stage by following their performances at Euro 88 with a solid qualification campaign for the 1990 World Cup, which ultimately, of course, ended in qualification.
This was uncharted territory at the time with the Republic's first ever qualification for a World Cup. Can you describe the reaction at home and any difference to the reaction to the Euro 88 qualification?
Yeah, I mean, there was great euphoria here in Ireland, and there was great excitement, kind of looking ahead to the World Cup itself and the possibility of who we would play and so on. But it was sort of half expected because the expectation bar had been raised after Euro 88. So it was felt after Euro 88 that we had a reasonable qualifying draw all told. So if we could carry our form from Euro 88 and that qualification campaign into the World Cup qualification campaign, that we would have a great chance of qualifying. Now, as it turned out, and as I pointed out already, and again in previous podcasts, what helped us as well was that both Hungary and Northern Ireland were regressing at this stage. So really, I suppose once Hungary and Northern Ireland were cleared, and we took 3 points out of the 2 games against both Hungary and Northern Ireland. So that really more or less put us through, and it meant that we just had to break even with Spain, which we did, with a win and a loss. And I mean, it was a solid qualification campaign. The one loss we suffered in Seville, that happened when there was a lot of key players missing through injury. And in actual fact, the 2 goals we conceded in Seville, they were the only 2 goals that Ireland would concede during the entire qualification campaign. So it was all good on that front. I suppose the only criticism, if you could have one, or if you really wanted to dig deeper, was the fact that goal scoring was still something of an issue. We didn't really have a prolific goal scorer as such. And particularly against quality opposition, I mean, this was going to be a handicap. And it meant that our defence, even though because we weren't scoring goals, our defence was obviously going to have to keep conceding goals to the bare minimum. But all that anyway was in the future. But for now anyway, there was a great feeling of excitement that we had qualified for the World Cup, and it was overdue recognition for a lot of players in the Irish team at this stage. And yeah, there was a great feeling of optimism as to the journey ahead.
We come to the new year 1990 and the experimentations ahead of the World Cup. The first friendly is on March 28th at Dublin against Wales. For this match, we have the following lineup: Bonner, Morris, McCarthy, captain of the team, who at this point had joined Millwall. Moran, he'd be replaced by David O'Leary in the 75th minute. Staunton, he'd be replaced by Chris Hughton of Tottenham in the 67th minute. John Byrne, John Sheridan of Sheffield Wednesday. Ronnie Whelan, he'd be replaced by Kevin Sheedy in the 46th minute. Andy Townsend, making his international debut, Bernie Slavin of Middlesbrough, and Tony Cascarino. In this match, Ireland would be awarded a penalty kick after Maguire handled Bernie Slavin's shot. Kevin Sheedy took the spot kick, which was rebounded, and Bernie Slavin scored off the rebound in his international debut. Was the selection of Bernie Slavin through the grandmother rule questioned or criticized at the time?
Not particularly, no. Well, obviously, maybe through the grandmother rule, yes, there would have been the ripples of discontent here and there in that. But it was acknowledged at this stage that Ireland did need more options, shall we say, particularly among the strikers. And Bernie Slavin had been doing reasonably well in the English First Division for Middlesbrough at this stage. And the fact that he was eligible to qualify for Ireland, and for some reason, Shahan, he had been overlooked by Scotland for a couple of seasons prior to this. So that influenced Bernie's decision to declare for the Republic. And of course, as we all know, Jack never lost an opportunity, to get players to declare if he was made aware of any ancestral qualifications that these players would have had. Bernie scored in his debut, and he done quite well by all accounts. He really put in a good shift, as they say. His work rate was good. I suppose one of the other takeaways from this was that even though it wasn't obvious at the time, but in hindsight, we can see now the gradual diminishing of Ronnie Whelan's role in the Republic's team. In that, for this particular game, Jack Charlton named Mick McCarthy as captain. Ronnie had been captain for the most part up to this, but from now on, we are to see where Mick becomes captain, retains the captaincy, and Ronnie eventually, whether it's due to injury or whatever, Ronnie's role in the Republic team is gradually diminished. So that was, in hindsight, another takeaway from this game. But the game itself, anyway, it was quite a poor game. The surface of the Lansdowne Road pitch wasn't great. Terry Yarrett, the Welsh manager, was quite critical of the playing surface, but wasn't a particularly good game. But I suppose it served its purpose from Ireland's point of view in that it gave Jack the chance to experiment, and we did eke out a victory against a Wales team that were gradually improving at this stage. So, all told, anyway, it was a worthwhile exercise. And as you say, it blooded Bernie Slavin in a green shirt.
The next friendly was on April 25th against the Soviet Union, again at Dublin. For this match, we have Jerry Payton of Bournemouth in goal, Chris Morris, he'd be replaced by Chris Houghton in the 73rd minute. Mick McCarthy, David O'Leary, he'd be replaced by Kevin Moran, who had joined Blackburn Rovers at this point in the 77th minute. Steve Staunton, John Byrne, Gary Waddock of Millwall,
Yeah.
Paul McGrath, Andy Townsend, Kevin Sheedy, David Kelly of Leicester, and Niall Quinn of Manchester City. Republic won this match with a goal in the 60th minute when Steve Staunton scored from a free kick.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, Shahan. Of course, the one standout from this game was the reappearance of Gary Waddock. After 4.5 years, his previous appearance had been back in the autumn of 1985. This was his first appearance under Jack, and he was maybe making a late claim for a place in the World Cup final squad because he had recovered from a serious knee injury. He had been a QPR, suffered a serious knee injury there, went to Belgium to play with Charleroi, and by 1990 he was back in English football with Millwall and performing quite well and got a call up for this game. And, you know, in many ways, it was great to see him back because he was a wholehearted player, always committed to the cause and always proud of his Irish ancestry. Because of the fact that he played in this game, it kind of heightened expectations that maybe he was going to make the World Cup final squad. And he ultimately did. But as we'll come to in a few moments from now, he was controversially omitted from that squad. But yeah, for now anyway, he was back in the fold, and the Republic, as you say, won this game with a Steve Staunton free kick. Again, a fairly uneventful game. In actual fact, some of these friendlies at this stage were turning out almost to be bore-fests. It's fair to say, even though the Republic were getting victories and the results. But, of course, in the aftermath of this game, another topic came up, which was an undercurrent for some time now, and that was the state, or the consistently, it seemed, poor state of the Lansdowne Road pitch. In that the Soviet manager, Valery Lobanovsky, likened the pitch to being suitable for horse racing. And he also said in the aftermath of this game that Ireland could actually win the World Cup if they played all their games on this particular pitch. Ireland, by this stage, we were unbeaten for 4 years in Lansdowne Road, both in competitive games and friendly fixtures. But by this stage, the consistently poor state of the pitch was beginning to tarnish what was a well-earned reputation. Some of it was, shall we say, maybe Jack's own doing, in that, Jack preferred, because of the fact that we were a workman-like team for the most part, Jack preferred maybe a surface that wouldn't be great and that would kind of hinder the opposition, maybe as much as assist us. The state of the pitch was becoming a recurring issue at this stage, and it was really only resolved once and for all 3 years later in 1993, which we'll come to in a future podcast, when the FAI put up the majority of the money towards installing floodlights in Lansdowne Road. And because of that, they were able to get agreement from the Irish Rugby Football Union, who owned Lansdowne Road, that rugby games, where possible, would be postponed or moved immediately before important international soccer games. So, but for now anyway, even though Lansdowne Road was serving its purpose, I mean, you were guaranteed a sellout for every Republic of Ireland game by this stage, which meant, 50,000 people in the ground and kind of a considerable boost to the FAI's coffers. But be that as it may anyway, for now anyway, it was the Republic's home. They were certainly going to make full use of it. The squad was beginning to bed in at this stage, and it was becoming more or less a settled squad.
The next match was on May 16th, again at Dublin, against Finland, in what was billed as Liam Brady's testimonial. So he would captain the Republic of Ireland in this match for the first 26 minutes before being substituted. For this match, we have Bonner, Houghton, McCarthy, O'Leary, Staunton. He'd be replaced by Chris Morris in the 67th minute. Houghton, McGrath, Liam Brady. He'd be replaced by Andy Townsend in the 26th minute. John Byrne. He'd be replaced by Kevin Sheedy in the 63rd minute. Cascarino, who had joined Aston Villa on deadline day, I think, and
Yeah.
Bernie Slaven, and he'd replaced by John Aldridge in a 56 minute. So this was Liam Brady's 72nd and final cap. His first cap had been in 1974. As far as the match, Finland took the lead in the 76th minute through Vesa Torianen. 5 minutes before the end, in the 85th minute, Kevin Sheedy tied the match after John Aldridge's attempt hit the bar. Kevin Sheedy headed in the rebound. Not a satisfactory result against a relatively weak opponent at home, but the main takeaway was that it was Liam Brady's final appearance for the Republic.
Yes, and once again, he was replaced in that game as well. Now, again, I don't know whether it's commonplace for a player to be,
I've seen it done.
substituting.
Yeah, I've seen that done. Like
Yeah.
usually because they do it so that the player gets a standing ovation.
But then by the same token, Sean, maybe they could have left him on for a bit longer as well. But yeah, either or anyway, I suppose we can only speculate at this stage. But well, first of all, I mean, it was a magnificent gesture by the FAI to begin with, in that they were given the proceeds of what was essentially going to be a sellout game to Liam. They made this game his testimonial, which was fantastic recognition, for one of the greatest players ever to pull on the green jersey. The game itself, again, it was sort of a poor enough performance, and this was now the third friendly in the spring of early summer of 1990, and even though we were unbeaten, we got 2 wins and a draw. We weren't exactly pulling up trees. And again, goal scoring was again turning out to be a problem, in that the goal we had scored against Wales was a rebound from a missed penalty. The goal against the Soviets was direct from a free kick, and this equaliser we got against Finland was something of a lucky break as well. You could say as well that maybe it was the end of a long, hard season for a lot of these Republics players, and that many of them were, I suppose, maybe trying to avoid injury, which would scupper their places of making the World Cup final squad. Really, apart from that, there wasn't really much to take away from this particular game, except it was another run out for the players ahead of the World Cup. And after this game, then I believe the final 22 were going to be named for Italia 90.
Regardless of this result, obviously the aspect of it being Liam Brady's last game, what was the atmosphere surrounding that? As you said, one of Ireland's greatest players. Was there any feeling that maybe he still had a part to play, or was there an acceptance that his time with the Republic was up?
The view on that was somewhat mixed, Paul. Some people were of the view that he still had a part to play, and that maybe he could be taken to Italy and maybe used what we term nowadays as an impact substitute. But others then were of the view that maybe he was past his best, and that because the Republic were getting results under Jack Charlton, that Jack Charlton knew what he was doing. And that because the results backed up, shall we say, Jack's methods of selections and tactics and so on, that many people felt that the course that Jack was pursuing was ultimately right. But it's really hard to know, because kind of differences between Jack and Liam aside, it's fair to say that Liam was past his best at this stage, and that maybe injuries had caught up with him a little bit. But could he maybe have gone to Italy as part of the squad? I think so. And maybe he could have, as I say, been used maybe as a substitute, maybe for the final 20 minutes of a particular game or so, depending on the way a particular game was going. But again, that's just my view anyway. And as it turned out anyway, he didn't go to the World Cup, and Ireland done reasonably okay in his absence. So, yeah.
We come to the final two friendlies before the World Cup. On May 27th, Ireland traveled to Turkey at Izmir to face the host nation. I could not find any footage from this match anywhere.
I couldn't either.
It ended as a scoreless tie. So for this match, we have Bonner, Morris, McCarthy, O'Leary. He replaced by Slaven in the 67th minute. Staunton, he'd be replaced by Houghton in the 51st minute. Gary Waddock, he'd be replaced by John Byrne in the 51st minute. This was Gary Waddock's 21st and final cap. His first cap had been in 1980. We have McGrath, Townsend, he replaced by John Sheridan in the 46th minute, Sheedy, Cascarino, and Aldridge. Now, getting back to Gary Waddock, which we mentioned earlier, he had surprisingly earned a recall in April. Now, what is the story behind this episode? Sudden recall, and like I said, him being cut in the last minute.
This is actually a story that isn't well known on much of the Irish soccer public, so I suppose it deserves a retelling here. Gary Waddock, the day after the Finland game, the 22 had been named for the World Cup, which, barring some extenuating circumstances, would have been the 22 that were going to the tournament. And Gary Waddock was in the 22. He went anyway and played this first warm-up game against Malta. But shortly after half-time anyway, he was replaced by John Byrne in an inconsequential scoreless draw. Now, there seemed to be nothing unusual in that, Jack made several substitutions during this game, and this game really was the first of a series of warm-up games. So there wasn't really, I suppose, anything at face value to be read into substitution players at this stage. But so when the game was over anyway, they were to play a friendly the following week against Malta in Valletta. So the team anyway boarded the flight for Valletta. And when the plane touched down in Valletta, Jack Charlton pulled Gary Waddock to one side and told him there and then that he was being omitted from the squad, and that Alan McLaughlin of Swindon Town, who had been uncapped up to now, apart from a B international against England the previous March in Cork, Alan was going to be replacing Gary in the squad, and the decision was final, and that there was going to be no going back in it. Now, I mean, it was something of a shabby way to treat a particular player. And Jack admitted afterwards that dropping Gary Waddock was the worst, he used an expletive, mistake he ever made. In that Gary wanted to play, as I say, he always made himself available when injury-free for the Republic. But, it did raise questions as well as to why he was brought back into the fold, and then almost beyond the last minute, after the squad being named, that he was excluded from the squad and that an uncapped player was being brought in his place. So it did raise a number of questions, and the obvious thing in hindsight, of course, would have been that maybe to include both Gary Waddock and Alan McLaughlin in the squad, because it was widely acknowledged at this stage that we needed cover for our midfielders, particularly Ronnie Whelan and Ray Houghton, who were somewhat injury prone at this stage. And Jack Charlton actually admitted years later that the reason he dropped Gary Waddock was actually to take Frank Stapleton to the World Cup. But as it turned out, Frank Stapleton didn't see a single moment of action in the World Cup. Bernie Slavin went to the World Cup as well. He didn't see a single moment of action. And John Byrne was another player that went in the squad and again didn't see a single moment of action. So, you would wonder maybe as to why Gary Waddock, who he obviously still had a contribution to make, because if he hadn't, he wouldn't have been called up for this friendly game against the Soviet Union and then been named initially in the 22-man squad. But the other question about it then was that if Alan McLaughlin had impressed Jack Charlton so much, why hadn't Alan McLaughlin been included, or why hadn't he featured in the warm-up games prior to now? But when Jack anyway was quizzed about all of this, he seemed to fudge his reasons for bringing Alan McLaughlin into the squad. He said that they had been looking at Alan for some time, but they hadn't been able to get hold of him because of his club commitments. Because, as you know, he was playing with Swindon Town at this stage, and Swindon Town were qualified for the old First Division this season through the playoff system, which took place in May. So because of that, Alan would have been unavailable, certainly for the game in May against Finland. But he certainly could have been introduced into the fray maybe in the matches against Wales or against the Soviet Union. Because it did seem a bit of a strange calling up an uncapped player into a tournament squad. But be that as it may, anyway, Gary, rightly or wrongly, his time in an Ireland jersey was up. Undoubtedly, Jack, in hindsight, could have handled the situation some bit better. But I suppose Jack, as we all know, could be quite taciturn and could be quite abrasive and could be quite blunt at times and maybe a little bit insensitive in his handling of players, and this was very much evident again on this occasion.
This last friendly ahead of the World Cup was on June 2nd against Malta at Valletta. This is another match where I could not find any footage for.
Yeah, me neither.
For this last match, we have Payton, Houghton, O'Leary, Morn, captain of the team, Staunton, Byrne, making his international debut, Alan McLaughlin of Swindon Town, Sheridan, Slavin, he replaced by Townsend in the 71st minute, Niall Quinn, David Kelly, he replaced by Frank Stapleton in the 62nd minute. This was Frank Stapleton's 71st and final cap. His first cap had been in 1976. So Ireland won this match 3-0. Niall Quinn scored in the 43rd minute. Townsend scored in the 77th minute. And Frank Stapleton scored the third in the 87th minute.
As I say, with no footage of the game, it's impossible to judge the performance, except that by the final score anyway, it seemed to be a comprehensive win for the Republic. As it turned out, it was Frank Stapleton's final appearance for the Republic, and he marked it with a goal. Again, another fantastic servant to the Republic over the years, and a player that maybe to an extent was maybe a little shabbily treated by Jack. Certainly in Frank's latter years, in a green shirt. But as I say, it was the final warm-up game before the World Cup with a good victory, and it set the team up nicely for the World Cup, which was to come.
This match, as you mentioned, featured the surprise inclusion of a new cap in Alan McLaughlin. Obviously, his biggest moment for the Republic would come a little bit later on.
Yes.
But how was this late selection viewed at the time?
Well, it was viewed as something of a surprise, really, but it was acknowledged by those that were following the English League, and particularly the old second division, and Swindon's promotion to the first division, was that Alan was a quality player and that he would be a useful addition to the squad. Certainly, youth was on his side anyway, and maybe Jack and Morissette saw him as somebody with an exciting international career ahead of him. So apart from that, there was very little, shall we say, questions about Alan's inclusion, except that he was gradually, he was seen as being a useful addition to the squad. And because the team were going so well at this stage, there was a feeling among a lot of the public in Ireland that whatever Jack doing was correct and that he was the right way to do it, and that he shouldn't be, not that he was going to be deviated from his course anyway, but that he should be left to choose the team and choose the selections as he saw fit.
Let's take a look at the final 22 as selected by Jackie Charlton. Number 1, starting goalkeeper, we have Paddy Bonner. Number 2, Chris Morris. Number 3, Steve Staunton. Number 4, Mick McCarthy, captain of the team. Number 5, Kevin Moran. Number 6, Ronnie Whelan. Number 7, Paul McGrath. Number 8, Ray Houghton. Number 9, John Aldridge. Number 10, Tony Cascarino. Number 11, Kevin Sheedy. Number 12, David O'Leary. Number 13, Andy Townsend. Number 14, Chris Houghton. Number
Bernie
15,
Slavin.
Bernie Slavin. Number 16, John Sheridan. Number 17, Niall Quinn. Number 18, Frank Stapleton. Number 19, David Kelly. Number 20, John Byrne. Number 21, Alan McLaughlin. And number 22, backup goalkeeper, Jerry Payton. We must specify that Ireland had the oldest average age of all the participating nations in this World Cup.
Yes. And again, along with Colombia, they were the only team as well that only took 2 goalkeepers to this World Cup. Jack preferred to take an extra outfield player instead, which was something of a gamble, but as it turned out anyway, it worked out okay. Because, as I say, all the other nations, with the exception of Colombia, took 3 goalkeepers. So the thinking behind that was that they would be well covered in that particular department. It was, I suppose, really the strongest squad that was available, considering the retirement at this stage of Liam Brady. I suppose maybe the somewhat maybe unfair exclusion of Gary Waddock. But apart from that, anyway, yeah, it was the strongest squad that was available to Jack at this particular time. And of course, the group we were in, it was going to be a tough group. It was widely acknowledged as the group of death, in that, we had ourselves, England, the Netherlands, who were European champions, and Egypt. We were still at a 2014 World Cup at this stage, and there was a number of third-place teams going to qualify for the knockout stages anyway. So the general perception was in Ireland anyway that even though it was going to be a difficult group and difficult assignments ahead of us, the fact that there was the possibility, or the strong possibility, of 3 teams qualifying from this group meant that there was a sense of optimism that, we were going to qualify from the group and make the knockout stages.
As you say, this was, almost certainly the strongest squad. Was there any discussion of other players that were maybe unfortunate to miss out, or do you think there wasn't quite that depth there at this time?
No, not quite at this particular time. Now, maybe if you really wanted to push the boat out, maybe you could say maybe Dennis Irwin, because Dennis Irwin had come to prominence this season with Oldham Athletic. They had been involved in, a promotion push from the second division, and they also had great domestic cup runs in England, and he came to prominence at this stage. But of course, as it turned out, immediately after 1990, Dennis was called up to the squad and made his mark, as it turned out. But I think at this stage anyway, it was felt that maybe this World Cup had just come a little bit too soon for him, and that at this stage anyway, we were sort of reasonably well served in the right back department anyway. So, but really, apart from that, Paul, I can't think of any others offhand anyway that, would have been notable exclusions, apart, of course, from the players that, like Liam Brady, that I mentioned previously.
Mike Milligan as well, but again, I'm biased.
Yeah,
also, the Oldham captain that season, he never really made it, but he was that was probably his best season, actually.
Yeah, but of course, would Jack maybe have been aware that he was eligible for under this stage? I'm not too sure, because Mike was only to get 1 cap, and that was 2 years later in 1992 in a friendly. Maybe the FAI weren't aware of Mike's Irish qualifications at this stage, but again, we were reasonably well served anyway in midfield. Maybe Mike hadn't done enough to justify the step up to international level at this stage. But be that as it may anyway, I mean, apart from that anyway, it was rightly acknowledged that the 22 that went were the strongest 22 available.
Were you singing Give It a Last Jack like everyone else at this point?
Well, I can't sing, so I certainly wasn't singing Shahan, but yeah, I was reasonably hopeful and excited about what was ahead. It was going to be an extremely tough group, and really there was only a sheet of paper and a wafer-thin sheet of paper at that, I think, between 3 teams, namely ourselves, England and the Dutch. And Egypt, even though a lot of us knew little about them, they were going to be, and as it turned out, they were to be formidable opposition as well. So there was grounds for cautious optimism. And yes, I mean, there was a feel-good factor in the country, and feeling of excitement and nervous trepidation as to what lay in store.
The World Cup started on June 11th, 1990 at Cagliari against England, just like the 1988 Euros. For this match, we have Bonner, Morris, Staunton, McCarthy, Moran, McGrath, Houghton, Aldridge. He'd replaced by Alan McLaughlin in the 64th minute, Cascarino, Sheedy, and Townsend. And of course, the England team, we have the likes of Peter Beardsley, Gary Lineker, John Barnes, Gascoigne. England takes the lead in the 8th minute through Gary Lineker. The Irish have to wait until the 73rd minute when Kevin Sheedy takes advantage of Steve McMahon's error to rob the ball from him and score with a shot from the edge of the box. It was not a pretty match. It ended 1-1, and I imagine it probably satisfied both teams at this point.
Yeah. I think certainly from an Irish point of view anyway, this was really seen as a kind of a must-not-lose game. Whatever about the quality of the performance or how we achieved the result, it was seen as a must-not-lose game, because in a group such as this, if you were to lose your opening game, it was really going to put you on the back foot as regards qualification. It was a very poor game, and I think that has been well documented at this stage. And you could say that there was a number of poor games throughout this Italia 90 tournament, and unfortunately, for rightly or wrongly, the Republic featured in a fair number of these games. It's fair to say, but it was a dour struggle. Really, both teams really cancelled each other out. I suppose England and Bobby Robson approached this game with a degree of cautiousness, in that they did not want to be, I suppose, caught in the hop again as they were, 2 years earlier in Stuttgart. Because as we saw then, losing your opening game can have quite a detrimental effect on the progression prospects of a team. So I think both sides anyway saw it as a must-not-lose game. Maybe England might have shaded it a little if you really had to choose one team over the other. But the Irish performance, again, it was a typical Jack Charlton performance, full of graft, determination, not really an awful lot of skill, but it was really just a case of eking out a result. Both goals, you could say, were of the slightly fortuitous variety, in that the England goal, Gary Lineker got onto the end of a ball that maybe Packy Bonner and Mick McCarthy maybe be misjudged slightly between them, and Gary nipped in and scored. And then, of course, as you rightly pointed out, Kevin Sheedy, he failed of a mistake from Steve McMahon, who had been brought on just a couple of minutes earlier to replace Peter Beardsley. And again, actually, the irony was that Steve McMahon was a player that actually was sounded out a few years previously about declaring for the Republic of Ireland, but he declined at the time. He wanted to wait to see whether he would be called up by England, which he ultimately was. You could say 2 goals, but you could say maybe the slightly lucky variety, but in an overall sense, a draw was a fair result. From a scrappy game that really, apart from the result as a spectacle, doesn't live long in the memory. And yeah, a solid enough start for both teams.
The next match was on June 17th at Palermo against Egypt. The Irish wearing white kits. We have Bonner, Morris, Staunton, McCarthy, Moran, McGrath, Houghton, Aldridge. He replaced by McLaughlin in the 64th minute. Cascarino, he replaced by Niall Quinn in the 84th minute. Sheedy and Townsend. This would be another poor match, scoreless tie that left very bad memories for most people involved.
Absolutely, of course, Shahan. And of course, it became more memorable for an occurrence in the RTE television studio, which we will come to in a couple of moments. This was really, from an Irish point of view, a huge disappointment, in that it was played on a Sunday afternoon. There was a real kind of carnival atmosphere in Ireland, and the fact that it was a Sunday as well and a lot of people were off work meant that there was always going to be a bumper television audience for this particular game. And it was widely acknowledged that certainly prior to the tournament that Egypt were seen as the most likely opposition in which the Republic would beat. So the expectation was there that Ireland were going to beat Egypt, because even though Egypt had drawn their opening game against the Netherlands, they were still somewhat seen as something of an inferior team. And it was felt that Ireland should be too strong for the Egyptians. That was the feeling anyway, but as it turned out anyway, it was a huge disappointment. A 0-0 draw. And the result was one thing, but I think what really contributed to the disappointment, and I stress now disappointment, Shahan, among the knowledgeable soccer public, was that the tactics that we employed for this game, we never seemed to deviate from plan A, which was obviously long ball into the box, stifle the opposing midfield, put the opposition under pressure, force them into making mistakes. But as it turned out, Egypt too had ideas of their own as to how to counter our performance. So they decided to pack their midfield as well and try and stifle us. So it was really a war of attrition, with both teams cancelling each other out. For the quality that we were perceived to have had, we really should have been defeating Egypt. Okay, we offered little in attack, but I think it's fair to say that the Egyptians offered even less. The most saddening thing about it, from the perspective of the soccer knowledgeable public in Ireland, was that we did not really look like scoring, and we didn't create any clear-cut chances against what was seen as a poor team. I stress as well, Shahan, I mentioned a knowledgeable soccer public. You see, by this stage, you had two strands of soccer followers in Ireland. You had those who were there just for the good time, and they saw these matches as an occasion of national celebration. And because of that, they weren't really awfully concerned about the results we obtained or the style of football we played or the performances we put in. But then on the other hand, you did have the knowledgeable soccer people who were kind of more critical in their critiques of Ireland and its performances. They would have been obviously disappointed. And I mean, for anybody that knew anything about the game, it was a huge disappointment. It was like the feeling of the excitement there is when a balloon is inflated and then just a gradual puncturing of air. There was just a flat feeling after it. So in the aftermath of this game anyway, of course, in the RT studio, of course, you had Eamon Dunphy, who was a pundit at this time, and he was a well-known critic of Jack Charlton's and really a thorn in Jack Charlton's side at this stage. Eamon, I suppose, rightly felt that for a team that was so highly rated and so hyped up coming up to this World Cup, that we should be defeating teams such as Egypt. There was a combination of this, and then Eamon was a guy that felt that Liam Brady maybe should have been included in the World Cup final squad because of his creativity. So to sum up anyway, Eamon was quite frustrated with the Irish performance. There's a clip of it which is available on YouTube, basically where he kind of expresses that his embarrassment for Irish soccer, and he concludes his monologue by throwing his pen across the studio table in frustration. Now, this unfortunately was to have far-reaching consequences for Eamon Dunphy, in that it kind of set him out really as something of a pariah, particularly among those Irish folk who saw these World Cup games as something of national celebrations and weren't really overly concerned about, the results or how the team performed or whatever. And of course, it was wrongly perceived as well by some that Eamon had actually said during his analysis that he was embarrassed to be Irish, when in actual fact he did not say this. And the replay of Eamon's clip was subsequently played on a few occasions in the days after this to prove that Eamon did not say he was embarrassed to be Irish. But there was a perception out there, which still remains, unfortunately, to this day, that he did say that he was embarrassed to be Irish. And it did cause him a lot of grief. It culminated a few days later with Jack Charlton walking out of a press conference in Palermo, a press conference that Eamon Dunphy was in attendance with, because Eamon was also working as a journalist for the Sunday Independent newspaper at this stage. So that meant that Eamon would be in the RT studio for some of the games, and for other games then he would have been actually out with the Irish team in Italy covering the games for the Irish Independent newspaper. So Eamon was back and forth to and from Italy. An Irish victory would have really put us in the driving seat in this group, in that England and the Netherlands had played a draw the night before. So a win for Ireland in this game would really have put us in the driving seat as regards qualification. But now, after the Ireland-Egypt game, you had a situation where all four teams in the group were level on points, level on goal difference, and level on goal scored. And it did show as well, Shahan, as well, the limitations that when Jack's style of play didn't work in a particular game, or when it could be successfully countered, that we did not really have a plan B, or Jack did not allow the players to express themselves and maybe play in a different way.
Yes, Jack Charlton himself put the blame firmly on the Egyptian tactics and said that he'd never seen a team that refused to attack. Do you think that reaction was justified?
Well, to an extent, Paul, it was. But then by the same token, I mean, you have to counter the opposition that's put in front of you. And as Jack also said, he said, maybe we should take some of the blame ourselves in that we didn't score. But he said, at least we tried. The Egyptians, I mean, they did set their stall out early on that they were going to be satisfied with a point. It's fair to say. But it was up to Ireland to try and break them down. We had kind of gained good results at this stage. So, I mean, it was envisaged that we should be good enough to kind of break down what was perceived to be a limited team such as the Egyptians were. Now, I mean, how limited the Egyptians were is open to debate because, okay, they got a point. They set their stall out early on in this game, to get a point. But they also had got a point against the Netherlands. So they were eyeing up qualification as well. Where possible, if Ireland could have gone into the game against the Dutch, having already qualified and only playing for position, that this would have taken some of the pressure off. But what all this meant now was that the Netherlands were going to have to get a result against us, and we were going to have to get a result against the Netherlands. So it was really going to be a real cutthroat encounter with no quarter after given on either seed.
It has been suggested that the back pass rule that was changed in the aftermath was mostly because of this particular match. Do you know if it's accurate?
It was certainly changed in the aftermath of the 1990 World Cup because of the amount of, negative play that was going on. But certainly, as you pointed out, this game certainly would have been, I suppose, an exhibit A in the move to change the back pass rule. And then, of course, the other thing that was changed in the aftermath of Italia 90 was the tackle from behind. And Mick McCarthy, for instance, I mean, it's well documented that he committed 23 fouls in this tournament, more than any other player, but never even received a yellow card. So I think he would have been seen as exhibit A as well in the move to cope the tackle from behind.
We come to the last match in the group. On June 21st at Palermo, the Irish faced the Dutch. Now, this is the Dutch side that includes Ruud Gullit, Marco van Basten, and Frank Rijkaard, the AC Milan trio. So, Ireland, again wearing white. We have Bonner, Morris, Staunton, McCarthy, Moran, McGrath, Houghton, Aldridge. He replaced by Ronnie Whelan in the 62nd minute. Sheedy, he'd be replaced by Cascarino in the 62nd minute. Townsend and Niall Quinn. The Dutch take the lead in the 10th minute through Ruud Gullit. The Irish have to wait until the 71st minute when Packy Bonner takes a long punt. Barry Van Arel attempts to pass it back to the Dutch goalkeeper Hans van Breukelen. The trajectory of the ball was too strong and he could only parry the attempt. And Niall Quinn was there to knock in the loose ball. And the match ended as a 1-1 tie. England defeated Egypt at the same time, so they won the group. Ireland and the Netherlands reached the second round as third best placed team. Ireland had reached the second round in their first World Cup ever. Their play had not appealed to many, but I guess their perseverance had. Do you think their World Cup was already a success?
Yeah, I would say so because qualification from the group was the main aim and we achieved that. So I suppose that was seen as a success. But anyway, just to go back to the Holland game now, this probably actually for 70 minutes was, shall we say, one of the better games of the tournament that Ireland had been involved in that there was an element of football played in the game. Holland took the lead after 10 minutes with a well-worked goal from our Ruud Gullit. Ireland, of course, they really had to graft their way back into the game, and then halfway through the second half, again through another defensive error, like was the case against England, Niall Quinn profited from it and Ireland drew level. Actually, shortly after Ireland drawn level, word got through to pitch side in Palermo that England were leading Egypt. So there was something of an unofficial truce declared for the last 15 or 20 minutes of that game. In that, at that stage, provided England were going to hold on to their victory, which it was perceived that they would, a draw would put both Ireland and the Dutch through. So neither team for the last 15 or 20 minutes really laid a glove on each other. Not easy on the eye from an Irish point of view, Again, it was just hard graft. Again, the goal we got was again from another long kick out from Packy Bonner, just as was the case against England. And again, Ireland, the beneficiaries of a defensive error. There was little creativity there, and it was hard to see kind of where the goals were coming from because both our goals that we had scored to date had come from defensive errors. Now, Ronnie Whelan actually came on in this game, and this was actually his only appearance in this World Cup, which was somewhat baffling as well, because Liverpool had won the league title in England in the season just concluded, and Ronnie was an integral part of that championship winning team. In actual fact, some of that season, actually, he had captained the team in the absence of Alan Hansen. But he wasn't introduced against England. He certainly wasn't introduced when he could have been introduced against Egypt, where maybe somebody of his creativity and nous could have broken down the Egyptian rearguard, as it were, maybe through a well-placed pass or a piece of creativity. And again, his involvement in this game against the Dutch was just limited to the last 25 or 30 minutes, and he wasn't to appear again in the tournament. Now, Jack maintained that the reason Ronnie had played or made such little game time in the tournament was because of the fact that he was carrying an injury. But Ronnie has always disputed this and disagreed with this. So maybe again, this was maybe another instance in hindsight of another player being gradually frozen out of the Republic setup. In this particular case, Ronnie Whelan, who again, like Liam Brady, would have been seen as a creative player. Maybe someone that Jack Charlton maybe felt was a little bit of a risk playing, in that, okay, being creative was one thing, but you might be liable then maybe to lose the ball in possession or give the ball away inadvertently or whatever. So it was a 1-1 draw, good enough to put us both through, even though a lot of people in Ireland have tended not to support England. There was actually a feeling of quite satisfaction when the final score came through from Calgary that England had beaten Egypt. And the reason for that was because of Egypt's sterile and nullifying tactics that they had employed in their previous game against Ireland. So I think it was seen that a lot of Irish people anyway were glad that Egypt were out. Of course, what all that meant was that, okay, a draw put both the Republic and the Dutch through, but it still meant that Ireland and the Dutch were still tied on points, head-to-head, goal difference and goals scored. So for the first time, and I think today, the only time in a World Cup, lots were drawn to determine who would finish second and who would finish third. The prize for finishing second was a game against Romania in Genoa and an extra day's rest, whereas the dubious prize for finishing third was a clash in Milan against the West Germans, who were kind of seen as one of the tournament favourites at this time. So there was a bit of trepidation anyway before the draw was made. For some reason, the draw, it did not take place for maybe 40 or 45 minutes after the games had concluded. So there was a lot of nail biting and nervous tension around. And I remember actually the draw was televised live on Irish television. So the first team anyway out of the drum were the Netherlands. So it remained to be seen then what number would be drawn against them. And sure enough, Sepp Blatter drew the number 3, which meant that the Netherlands had been drawn in third position, meaning that they would play West Germany. And because of that, we would end up being drawn in second place and thus maybe having an easier game, or what was perceived to be an easier game, against Romania. One thing that has always fascinated me was that if, say, the England-Egypt game had finished in a 1-1 tie, you would have a situation where all 4 teams would have been level on everything. So, I mean, lots would have to be drawn to decide the entire group, which would have been somewhat bizarre. Very unique. And I mean, kind of whichever team would have been eliminated without losing a game. So they could claim with some justification, whoever they would be, that they were unfairly eliminated. But be that as it may anyway, that was the way it turned out. There was really no outstanding games, I think, in the group. England, by virtue of beating Egypt, that was enough for them to actually top the group and for Egypt to be eliminated. And the rest of the games then, it was just a case of the teams cancelling each other out. But we have to say as well that maybe the gods or the fortunes of luck shone kindly on Ireland on this occasion.
We come to the second round match against Romania on June 25th at Genoa. So this is the Romania of Georgi Hagi, Florin Raducioiu, George Popescu, among others. For this match, we have Bonner, Morris, Staunton, He'd be replaced by David O'Leary in the 94th minute. Mick McCarthy, Moran, McGrath, Houghton, Aldridge. He'd be replaced by Tony Casco in the 22nd minute. Sheedy, Townsend, and Niall Quinn. This was another scoreless tie that went to extra time and ultimately had to be decided on a penalty kick shootout. It came down to the last kick by David O'Leary after Timofte had missed Romania's fifth attempt. O'Leary scored, and the Republic of Ireland became the first team to advance to the quarterfinals of the World Cup without winning a single game.
Yeah, a dubious distinction, but I suppose the end justifies the means. So ultimately, Ireland did qualify for the quarterfinals. So I suppose it didn't really matter in the long run. But again, another poor game. I think Romania were without Lakatush in this game, were they?
Yes.
Yeah, and he certainly would have been a loss to Romania. Both teams really cancelled each other out. Again, there was little quality football played in the game. There was, I suppose, maybe the occasional half chance for here and there from either side. It was really a game that doesn't live long in the memory. If the Ireland-Egypt game was the worst game of Italia 90, this Ireland-Romania game certainly would be up there alongside it as a leading contender for that title. From a long way out, it looked as though this was going to go the whole distance to extra time. And then once extra time came, it was going to go to penalties. And it was really just the tenseness of the occasion that kept people absorbed in it. It was a Monday afternoon, and by this stage, the country had come to an entire standstill. And there is actually footage on YouTube, if you look at it, of the main streets in some of Ireland's main cities deserted while this Ireland-Romania game is in progress. So that will tell you that a lot of people would have taken maybe a half day from work, or some workplaces would have closed early or whatever. So again, for a Monday afternoon, the country would have come to a standstill while this game was in progress. It went all the way to penalties. And as we know, of course, the penalties are well documented at this stage. The first four on each side were scored. Timofte then missed for Romania, which I had a feeling, though, I have to say that looking back at that game, that he was going to miss because for some reason, he took a very short run up to the ball. And really, when you do that, you don't really get power into your shot. So to take an extremely short run up, your penalty is going to have to be well placed. But he obviously, anyway, had confidence in his ability. But Packy Bonner saved it, as we all know. And then, of course, it was left to David O'Leary to convert what was the decisive penalty. And in one way, it was redemption for David O'Leary. Here was a player who had been excluded by Jack Charlton from international soccer for 2.5 years. And ultimately, he was the player that was entrusted by the other players with the responsibility of taking this penalty that would send the Republic into uncharted waters, namely the quarterfinals of a World Cup. David, actually, he must have been a real pressure kick. There's no doubt about that. And of course, the RTE television commentator in Ireland, George Hamilton, as David was about to take the kick, he uttered a line which has become immortal to this day, in that the nation holds its breath. So it really encapsulated the moment perfectly. And of course, there was the silence for 1 second. And then a second later, when the ball hit the net, there was absolute bedlam. That the pitch invasion of the Irish substitutes and backroom staff, which I have yet to see, at the conclusion of any penalty shootout. And of course, the jubilation here in Ireland. And of course, among the supporters in Genoa was really out of this world. Good times all around. Even though it was a poor game of football, it was a fantastic national occasion. And the end result was that, by hook or by crook, we were in the quarterfinals of the World Cup.
Though, as you say, it was another scrappy match. Do you think the drama of the penalties makes it a more memorable occasion?
Yeah, I would say so, Paul, because if you look at any highlights package of this game, there's only maybe a couple of minutes, if at all, shown of the actual play, but the entire penalty shootout is shown. So obviously,
That's all you need to know.
Yeah, the penalty shootout, I suppose, redeemed it for excitement and tension and everything. But again, fortune smiled on us. We had got through this assignment and we were in the quarterfinals. So I think by this stage, it was more kind of the journey, I suppose, more than the performances that had captured the imagination of the Irish public.
For the quarterfinals, the Irish were to face the host nation, Italy, at Roma on June 30th. For this match, we have Bonner, Morris, Staunton, McCarthy, Moran, McGrath, Houghton, Aldridge. He'd be replaced by John Sheridan in the 78th minute, Sheedy, Townsend, Niall Quinn, and he'd be replaced by Tony Cascarino in the 53rd minute. The host nation, Italy, would win this match 1-0. In the 38th minute, Roberto Donadoni took a strong shot that Paki Bonner could only parry. And Toto Schillaci, the hero of the World Cup, knocked in the rebound. Ireland exited this World Cup with their head held high after losing to the hosts. I imagine everyone was satisfied despite the loss.
Yeah, you could say that, Shahan, because it was felt kind of before the tournament that given a bit of luck, Ireland would make the quarterfinals. And I think that was kind of generally seen as the limit, that they were really quarterfinal material. And if we got there, well, it would constitute a successful World Cup. Strangely enough, this was regarded as one of the better Irish performances at the World Cup. It was a game that some believed that we possibly could have won, but I disagree with that, because even though we did play some good soccer in this game, it was a contrast to kind of the sterile performances against Romania and against Egypt and maybe to an extent against England. We did play some good soccer in this game, as did the Italians, and it was something of an open game. We didn't, though, create any sort of decent outright goal-scoring chances as such. Niall Quinn had something of a half chance midway through the first half with a header from outside the 60-yard box, but it brought a save from Walter Senga. But I felt anyway it was something of a routine save, because from there a hero would want to have to be fairly strong and fairly well placed to beat a goalkeeper of Walter Senga's standing. But Italy anyway, they scored through Toto Schillaci in the 37th minute following a shot from Donadoni, which I think maybe caught Paki Bonner a little bit by surprise. He parried the ball, and the force of the shot maybe knocked Paki off balance a little bit. He wasn't able to adjust his footing just in time to save the shot from Schillaci. Schillaci done what he'd done best at that World Cup, pounced on the opportunity, and that ultimately turned out to be the deciding goal. Now, second half, again, a good performance, but we never really looked like getting an equaliser. In fact, Italy, Toto Schillaci again hit the crossbar with a thunderous shot early in the second half. Italy had another goal disallowed for close offside call towards the finish. But it was seen by many as sort of a good Irish performance, but it justified, I think, the fact that we were up against the hosts and one of the favourites for the tournament. We did go down with a spirited performance. And I think for that reason alone, it was seen as a success. And that our entire journey at the World Cup had been a success, because, again, the majority of the Irish people would be casual soccer fans. So, I mean, they would have regarded, as I said already, these matches as national occasions. So as long as the team gave a good account of itself, a lot of people were satisfied, even though we might not actually win games. But again, this would have been in contrast maybe with the knowledgeable soccer public, who felt that if maybe Jack had kind of released the handbrake a little bit and let the players express themselves a bit more, maybe our results could have been a little bit better, and maybe we actually could have gone a little bit further. Because this game against Italy, again, of course, our old friend Eamon Dunphy, he was questioning in the aftermath of this game as to why Ronnie Whelan didn't feature at some stage in this game. And because really somebody of creativity and his ability to create, the fact that he was a skillful player. But yes, Jack opted to introduce John Sheridan instead of Ronnie Whelan. John Sheridan was a good player, and he did prove his worth to the Republic in subsequent years. I mean, there's absolutely no dispute about that. But for this particular game, maybe this game needed somebody with Ronnie's creativity and kind of maybe his ability to maybe unlock a defence with a well-placed pass or a well-placed through ball. So maybe, yeah, this was a game that maybe Ronnie could have been introduced in. But apart from that, even though Italy, okay, they won the game, but it wasn't certainly a stroll in the park by any stretch of the imagination for the Italians. And it was felt as well that maybe the quarterfinals was kind of the limit as to how far the Republic would go in this tournament. So, all told, anyway, defeat was at the Republic's case on the night, but defeat with honour, defeat with our heads held high, and it certainly reinforced the view that Ireland, it had put us on the map, and it certainly proved, I think, even though we did have a deficient style of play, and that our limitations had been exposed to an extent at this World Cup, it did show nonetheless that kind of we were now a force to be taken seriously at international soccer.
Yeah, looking at the World Cup overall, as you say, despite their inability to win the games, Ireland did gain a lot of support from neutrals for the adventure as a whole, their tenacity, ability to hold on. Was that the prevailing view, or would you say again there was that divide between the more knowledgeable football fans and the people that were just along for the ride?
Yeah, there was that fight there, Paul, but I suppose the people that were along for the ride kind of would have outnumbered the knowledgeable football fans because, like, we have to remember as well, and I did say this earlier in earlier podcasts, that really it was only kind of at Euro 88 that a lot of people started following the Irish soccer team. So, and certainly from Euro 88 on, they would have attracted what we'd call the casual soccer observer. So, for a lot of these people who might not have been too knowledgeable in the intricacies of soccer, they would have seen it kind of as one great journey, kind of to the quarterfinals and, you know, the last 8 of the greatest tournament in world football. I suppose, Paul, very much like England's journey as well to the semi-finals of that World Cup, in that, again, England's performances, they were more workmanlike rather than spectacular. But again, like the Republic, the end justified the means, and England went to the semi-finals and rather unluckily lost to the West Germans on penalty kicks. And just by the way, Paul, what would have been sort of the English view of the Irish performances at Italia 90? Shall we say in the media? Like, would the English media have been kind of sort of supportive of the Republic? Or would some of their knowledgeable soccer journalists have been critical of the style of play that Jack would have espoused?
I think it would probably be a similar split. I think there was a lot of general support for Ireland, but yeah, certainly there would also have been some criticism of the style of play.
Yeah.
Not that England were exactly flamboyant at this World Cup, as you've said, but I mean, I think it was, you know, no one was underestimating Ireland. That was for sure after Euro 88, and I think it was expected that they were going to be strong and difficult to beat, as it proved.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think there was always an element of criticism of the more direct style of play, shall we say, but probably a lot of public support and a lot of support amongst neutrals for them as well.
Yeah, because I know, for instance, Jeff Powell of the Daily Mail, he certainly did not lament Ireland's departure from that World Cup anyway, because of the style of play that Jack Charlton had espoused. But again, I suppose Jack could equally say with some justification that he was there not to entertain, but to get results. And I suppose Italia 90 was a case in point of that. It was really the last, I think, in many ways, of the old World Cups, in that it did result ultimately in a lot of rule changes, which were for the better and which contributed more to attack and play. So I think Italia 90 really will go down in memory kind of as being, if not the most overly defensive World Cup. The games in general, even a lot of the other games throughout the entire tournament, they were bore-fests, I think. One would be really hard placed to pick out maybe a handful of reasonably exciting games from that tournament. So yeah, Italia 90 was certainly kind of, I suppose, a watershed moment in world soccer, in that it was really, as ultimately proved, it was a case of out with the old and in with the new as regards rule changes and so on.
What were match days like in Ireland and the television coverage, I imagine by RTE?
Yeah, well, RTE, as you know, was the only broadcaster in Ireland at this stage. And of course, they gave the World Cup blanket coverage. Every match that could be televised live was televised live. And in addition, as well, you also had the Eurosport channel, which was available on the Astra satellite in Ireland as well. And they actually were shown all 52 games in their entirety. They would show a combination of live matches and full deferred recordings of other games. The television coverage, yeah, from RTE anyway, it almost would have been saturation coverage for the World Cup. Because it was, the Republic's first appearance at the World Cup finals, no stone was going to be left unturned as regards television coverage. There was all sorts of preview programs in the run-up to it, and then after the tournament, there was all sorts of review programs as well. It was blanket coverage. We got to see basically virtually all the matches across the tournament. And the coverage as well, of course, would have reflected the state of the nation at the time as well, and the general euphoria that was out there, and the on-street celebrations and the celebrations both indoors and outdoors when after matches and journey to the quarterfinals. And then, of course, as we all know, the day after the quarterfinals on the Sunday, on the same evening that England were playing Cameroon, actually, the Republic team arrived home to a tumultuous reception in Dublin, where it was estimated that 500,000 people turned out on the streets of Dublin to welcome home the Irish team. There were good times in Ireland. It certainly brightened up that entire summer of 1990. And some people would say that the roots of Ireland's economic success of the late 1990s and for much of the noughties, which became known as the Celtic Tiger, that the roots of this were actually sown at this 1990 World Cup, in that it gave Ireland and its people a feeling that we weren't inferior to other countries or other people of the world, that if we applied ourselves well, we were as good, if not, we were certainly as good as anybody else out there. And it kind of fed into a whole sense of national, I suppose, renewed self-confidence and a feel-good factor, which was the portent of things to come. Of course, we should point out as well, even though Jack Charlton had already obtained legend status in Ireland prior to Italia 90, this World Cup certainly cemented that once and for all. He really became a true legend and has remained to this day a true legend in Ireland, and rightly so at that. The other side of all of this, moving away from football for a moment, the other side of all of this was that because Jack Charlton had such a high profile, by this stage he was earning more out of after soccer activities, like after dinner speaking engagements and various launches and so on, that he was actually earning more out of public appearances than he was from his salary with the FAI. And actually, I must tell you, there is actually a well-known story in the aftermath of this World Cup, and maybe you have heard of this, about when Jack was on a fishing trip. I think you may have heard this particular story. About a month after the World Cup, maybe in late July or early August of 1990, Jack actually arrived in County Mayo in the west of Ireland with a couple of his friends on a fishing trip, you see. It was meant to be kept very quiet, because Jack obviously wanted to unwind after the World Cup, and maybe take some time off to pursue his other favourite pastime, which was fishing. So himself anyway and a couple of his friends came over to County Mayo, and they spent one afternoon anyway fishing up there. So that evening anyway, they went into the nearest village, into one of the local pubs for a drink. Now, of course, word had spread that Jack Charlton was in the area fishing. So before long, anyway, the pub was crowded with people, all wanting to meet Big Jack and shake hands with him and, congratulate him on a job well done and so on. So Jack anyway, when the pub was full, Jack anyway decided, which was a little bit out of character, but we will see anyway later what the meaning to all of this was. Jack anyway ordered a round of drinks for everybody in the bar. So, of course, that made the good mood even better. And as the evening progressed anyway, after a while or so anyway, Jack kind of had a look around and he said, he said to the barman, give the people here another round of drinks. So Jack's friends that were with him, they thought that this was out of character of him, because Jack had a reputation for not spending money. So after a while anyway, 9:30 or 10 o'clock at this stage, Jack decided to, kind of turn in for the night. So before he left anyway, he asked the bartender how much was owed for the drinks. So the bartender anyway said, such and such an amount. So Jack anyway turned to one of his friends that came with him on the trip, and he said to him, he said, "Will I have a checkbook in my overcoat? There, will you give it to me, please?" So his friend anyway gave him the checkbook, but his friend was even more bemused by this, because whatever about Jack spending money, Jack had never used a checkbook up to this. So Jack wrote the check anyway and gave it to the bartender, and made his exit. So when they were out of the pub anyway, and when they were back at their lodgings, because they were obviously going to, I suppose, maybe spend a day or two there fishing, his friend anyway said to Jack, he said, it was unusual, that firstly, that you bought drinks for people tonight, and secondly, that you actually wrote a check. Jack was quite perceptive. Jack said to him, the reason I wrote a check was that I know for a fact the bartender will not cash that check. He will keep that check as a memento. So, sure enough, a year or two later, Jack came over again on a fishing trip. He went into the same bar again, and sure enough, the uncashed check was framed and hanging on a wall behind the bar. That really was, a fantastic story as to the character Jack was. And of course, it endeared himself to a lot of the public, in that, a lot of the public that night thought he was buying them free drinks, when in actual fact, there was meaning to his madness, as it were. But yeah, Jack was quite perceptive. And he could read into, shall we say, the public consciousness and the public mind. And then on another occasion, on another fishing trip, he was again in a village. Word got out that there was a river going through this town or whatever, and there was a bridge going over it. And when word emerged that Jack was below fishing, there was traffic congestion on the bridge, because everybody abandoned their cars on the bridge and got out and looked over the bridge. And there was Jack below them, totally oblivious to what was going on overhead, enjoying his fishing.
So looking back on this season, previously Jack Charlton had introduced debutants like Steve Staunton and Andy Townsend to great effect. And this season, that didn't really happen. Bernie Slave and Alan McLaughlin, but they didn't really make the same kind of impact. And it was more about maintaining a solid squad. And do you think it might have also been because it was difficult for Jack Charlton to locate suitable players for the tactics he wanted to play?
Yeah, that could be quite true as well, Paul. And then maybe the fact that by the time the 89-90 season came around, he had more or less a settled squad anyway. And he tended to be loyal to particular players, provided they didn't cross him or disagree with his tactics or opinions on how the game should be played. So, yeah, he had more or less a settled squad. Now, in the aftermath of 1990, the period post-1990 World Cup and up to the 94 World Cup, that was really when the Irish team reached their zenith. They really kicked on from this. And, for the next 3 years or 3.5 years, they really turned in some really impressive performances. So really, the 1990 World Cup was in many ways, I suppose, maybe a monkey off their backs, in that it proved to the players once and for all that with this system, with the right belief and so on, that we are as good a team and we are as good as players as anybody else, if not perhaps even better. Even though some of the performances up to and including the 1990 World Cup, even though we were getting the results, some of the performances were sterile and, shall we say, a tad on the boring side. Certainly post-1990, we certainly did turn in some impressive performances, and even we started even scoring goals, which had been a major handicap up to this stage. So, yeah, 1990 really was a foretaste of what was to come. It really, for once and for all, heralded the good times that were to continue really certainly up to the 1994 World Cup and a little after it. So after 1990, then, of course, new players were gradually brought in. And the following season, which we'll come to, of course, was notable for the inclusion of Dennis Irwin. And then, of course, at the end of that season, a young Roy Keane. For now, anyway, in 1990, he had a settled squad. And for most of the squad were going to be around for another couple of tournament or two yet.
This Italian 90 experience is part of Irish culture now. And films like The Van in 1996 with Cole Meany are a testament to this. Can you discuss more on the effects of this World Cup on the Irish culture as a whole?
As I mentioned earlier, Shahan, it is credited by some as being kind of the catalyst that culminated in what became the Celtic Tiger when the economy really took off in the late 1990s. But it really contributed, as I said already, to a whole feel-good factor. And I think, for years as well, the Irish people seem to have, whether it was ingrained in their psyche or not, something of an inferiority complex. But I think this World Cup finally, or to a large extent, banished that, in that it proved to the Irish that we're no different to any other race of people in the world. And, if we can apply ourselves and do a job to the best of our ability, there's no reason why we can't be successful on the world stage.
In closing, John, would you say that Italia 90 is the most memorable Irish World Cup because it's the first and the whole human interest story as the underdogs?
Yeah, you could say that, Paul, because I remember even qualifying for 94, even though there was excitement there, it came close to Italia 90, but it didn't surpass it. And even in 2002, the last time we qualified for a World Cup, even though there was general satisfaction, there was no, shall we say, real celebration in the streets to celebrate qualification like there was with Italia 90, because Italia 90 was really a whole new adventure. It was really a trip into the unknown. And even though, Ireland had experience of Euro 88 and experience of the workings of a major international tournament, going on to the biggest stage of all was really a trip into the unknown. So they were going into uncharted waters. And in some respects, they had nothing to lose. So, as long as they gave a good account of themselves, the majority of the people in Ireland were happy with that. And even though we did not play a style of football that was easy on the eye, I suppose, as I said already, the end justified the means, and we did end up getting to the quarterfinals. So that in itself constituted a successful World Cup.
With that, I would like to thank you for your continuous participation in this series. As always, feel free to leave questions and comments, and all our respective contact information are listed on the blog and podcast uploads. So, John, thank you once again, and looking forward to the 90-91 season.
Yeah. And thanks once again to you, Shahan, and to Paul. And always a pleasure and a privilege to be involved with these podcasts.
Thank you.
Discussing great times, kind of in Irish soccer history.
Indeed.
Thank you for joining us, John.